Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi here from Davos, where the World Economic Forum 2023 is being held. We are in a room in the India Lounge, and with me, cross-section of Indian industry. To my immediate left, Mr. Nadir Godrej, the chairman of Godrej Industries; Atul Dhawan, the chairman of Deloitte in India; Bhavin Pandya, a new age gamer, entrepreneur. He is the co-founder and co-chief executive officer of Games 24/7. And then finally, Tejpreet Chopra, founder and CEO of Bharat Light Power, someone who's been on a lot of television shows talking about the new future for India's energy landscape. Thank you very much. What we are going to do is to get a sense of what's going on, the good for India, and what needs to be done to fix what is not so good. Mr. Godrej, starting with you, how are things looking here apart from the weather?
Things look very exciting in Davos. India is quite prominent here in Davos. This is the G20 year as well, and the world is looking for some leadership from India. And India is the economic bright spot in the world, with recession in many countries, whether it is developed countries or developing countries. A lot of them are doing poorly, but India and a few other moderately developed Asian countries are doing well. And so that's a very good bright spot.
Mr. Dhawan, the mic to you, and starting off from what Mr. Godrej said and adding a quick point that the World Economic Forum Chief Economist's outlook that's just been released says that there's a majority view amongst all those who have been surveyed that the world will go into a recession. Let's forget the world. How are things looking for India from your point of view?
From our point of view, I'm going to add on to what Nadir was saying. I think the world looks pretty positive from our point of view. We think India is going to grow between 6.8 to 7.1%. Our survey of CEOs in India shows more than 60% expressing a view that India will grow more than 6.5%. So we've constantly held out that India is a bright spot in that recession, in that global trend for a possible recession. I think it's our time to use this opportunity to get a bit of a lead and or close the gap with our competitors and peers and march ahead. Just to add to what he was saying about our presence in Davos, you walk down the street, India is really something that is standing out.
I remember that slogan of many years back, and Davos regulars do that, India everywhere. Tejpreet, let's shine the light in more ways than one on what India is doing right to sustain that kind of growth. Like Mr. Dhawan pointed out, and there are various professional estimates as well, 6.5 to 7%. I'm sure many countries across the globe would give an arm and a leg and whatever else for those kinds of numbers.
No, thank you very much. I think there's no doubt about it that India is the bright spot in this crazy world we're living in, where there's a lot of uncertainty. Demand is getting impacted because of the war, because of the recession in the European regions, and also potentially in the US. So I think India's in a very good spot. But to coming back to your question, what do we do right? I think when you look at uncertainty in demand, there are two ways you can do it. One is you can't do much about controlling the demand side because it's out of your control. But on the supply side, I think that's something we guys in India have done right. On the supply side, it's driven from a large perspective from long-term policies. And I think the government and our country's done the right job in the last few years in putting together the framework of policies to encourage long-term investment into India, to really encourage manufacturing to come into India. And I think that's been a fantastic step, point one. Point number two is the government's doing a great job in terms of investing in infrastructure to really grow the infrastructure. Point number three, logistics. I think if we have to compete with some of the other manufacturing economies in the world, we need to get our logistics right. And I think we've done a fabulous job on that as well.
Okay.
We've got a long way to go, but at least we've started in making the right path towards getting that right.
Bhavin, to you, and I'm not going to ask you a startup question, but we are here, and perhaps our viewers can see Invest in India. a lot of investments flowed into the startup economy in India. People have said that there's a funding winter. There is winter here in Davos. What about startups, really?
So thank you for having me, first of all, Siddharth, with such eminent people. I'd like to say that, to add on to the points that the folks here are making, that the government has been very, very helpful and supportive in growing the startup ecosystem. And when the government is behind you in such a big way, there is no reason why there should be any funding winter, at least in India. Right, the bright spot point everyone made is 100% relevant and valid to the India growth story, especially. All the countries, even if you look at the stock markets, are going down, but India is really just going up and up from growth to growth, strength to strength. And so at least we're not, and with the certainty that is coming in now on the regulatory side for us as the gaming sector, we believe that there's no winter, at least in the near future.
There's no winter here, at least in the near future. Mr. Dhawan, I'm coming to you on, again, a broader point, which is fits in with the sort of revamp of India's presence on the economic global center stage. Years ago, tax and certain policies in India got us a lot of bad press. How is it now? Could you explain to our viewers, what do your clients, for example, globally tell you about how things are as far as India is concerned and the investment climate?
So let me start from the end of your question about the investment climate. We're seeing an uptick in the investment, and to your point about a winter for the startup funds. I don't think it's a winter. It's probably just a rationalization of how capital is flowing in to the startups. Just because the numbers coming down, I wouldn't see it as a problem. I think there is a maturity process in the whole startup game, and it is going to play a pivotal role. In fact, we were just talking before your show started. It is quite amazing how the government came out with the gaming policy. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this one would have been a difficult subject to deal with. But today, we are willing as a country to embrace these new business areas. And we are adapting the regulatory framework to that. I'm giving this as an example to show that regulations are changing. You keep reading reports about repealing laws, decriminalization that's taking place. We're trying to see how we can go beyond just the World Bank Index of the ease of doing business. Difficulties remain, there's no question of it. Debates remain in the tax laws, but please do remember tax laws are also impacted by pending litigation in courts. So you cannot make sweeping reforms because it has its own downstream challenges that you need to deal with. But if you look at the tax administration, it has improved dramatically. This year, for example, I'm told I'm not a recipient of that benefit just yet, but I'm told people got their assessment orders within a week of filing their tax return. It's never happened before. So I'm giving you these examples to show and demonstrate that the intent to get the regulations up, to modernize our regulatory framework, has been demonstrated, and this is a path to follow. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay.
Right?
Bhavin, very quick follow-up before I go to Mr. Godrej. The point about gambling, till some time ago, many people were confused with regard to the eventual approach by the government. And in debates, informally, there was a confusion within the policy establishment that gaming is equivalent, perhaps not fully, but definitely a little bit, to gambling. Has that confusion cleared up? And for an operator like you, do you think that the policy certainty environment is now very clear?
Almost there. Let me start with that. Right. So the confusion, and this is exactly the initiative MeitY under the able leadership of Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar has taken to try and clarify what is allowed and what is not. Gambling is not allowed in our country. It is illegal. There, I said it. Right? But games of skill are.
But if you
Other
bet on
casual,
games of skill?
It's okay. It's like you playing a game of chess. Otherwise, Vishwanath Anand would be behind bars right now. He makes money off of playing chess.
Mr. Godrej, as someone who's a veteran and he's seen a lot of policy changes, many governments come and go. In your entire career and storied business group, do you think, how would you rate this policy environment really? And give us a free and frank answer.
Right. First of all, I should like to state that there have been constant reforms in India. And there has been steady progress right from the beginning. Particularly after 91, there's steady reforms going on. Are we at the final end point? Not yet. Are we getting there? Definitely.
And there's no such thing as too much reform in the Indian context.
There's no such thing as too much reform. We need much more reform. We've already got a lot. The very fact that our industry and our economy is in a bright spot shows that there are reforms done, but clearly we have a long way to go as well.
Okay, long way to go. Yeah, please go ahead.
Siddharth, I just wonder if we should move away from the word reform. You can't be reforming an economy for 30 years, right? Maybe.
No, I'm glad you made that point because this is very important to understand.
Yeah,
Sometimes we just get beaten, reform.
Yeah, I think maybe the mindset needs to change, that we need to transform our economy. We do transformation at the businesses level. Maybe we need to do this at a national level.
So what should a New Year resolution be for the government? We're still halfway through Jan.
It's an interesting point. I would say it's not just the government. I think it's a responsibility for the wider community in the country.
Okay.
How about if we transform our economy? How about if we transform our country rather than just trying to reform it?
Okay.
So, is there too much transformation? No, it's time to modernize our country.
And perhaps that mindset will also help people deal with and come to terms with sometimes radical changes which may upset a lot of groups.
So can I just add one last point? I'm sorry. When we are talking of a 5 trillion economy, you cannot run that economy the way we run it so far. It's like any company. You cannot run a company that was 10 crores and when it becomes 1,000 crores. It cannot be run the same way.
That's a great point. And in Aam Aadmi terms, if you want your salary to double next year, you certainly have to do a lot more. Tejpreet, I'm coming to you. You haven't been to our India Today studio here, but where we are located, there are rows of solar panels. And when we came in here, they were covered with snow. It snowed through the night. But when the sun was out earlier today, the snow started melting from them. And it struck me at that time that how blessed we are as a country in some ways when it comes to solar power. I have asked you this question many times in the past several years, but today if you were to describe how is our renewable, especially the solar mix standing, how much progress have we made, how would you answer that quickly?
Siddharth, just one thing before I get into the solar, just one quick point I wanted to make. COVID broke supply chains around the world, right? And that was a huge issue that happened all over the world. And I think we in India are in a really good position to position ourselves as the next big destination to be a global supply chain for a lot of large manufacturing in the world. So I just wanted to make that point.
And why? Sorry to interrupt you. Why don't you add that bit and take it to the solar industry?
Absolutely.
Has that changed the manufacturing situation, the dependence on foreign imports when it comes to solar power?
Absolutely. And I think the answer is yes. I think it's a very clear mandate from the government of India that we want to encourage local manufacturing in panels, local supply chain for all renewable technologies, and I think that's happening. I think the big challenge we're going to have, Siddharth, is this. At the end of the day, we're competing with scale. Some other countries have got 70 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity. We are not there yet. So in that,
how much do we have now? Could you
rattle
off that number?
Yeah, in the order of magnitude, roughly about 10 gigawatts of capacity.
And how much would we need for solar power to make a real dent into thermal?
Yeah. So just to clarify, I'm talking about manufacturing capacity.
Yes, manufacturing capacity.
Yeah, we would need to at least triple that in the next few years if we have to get to our target of 500 gigawatts.
Okay.
We are roughly now about 150 gigawatts, so we have a long way to go. The bigger challenge we're going to have, Siddharth, in this journey of renewables is that I tell everybody, capital goes where there's a return, right? yes, capital will go
But
because
there have been problems with returns, states upending power purchase agreements,
Yeah.
changing their mind, government change, policy change.
the answer is yes, but I think that's where the central government stepped in with SECI PPAs. That's given us in the industry the stability that's required. However, I think the big challenge is, I remember the first solar farm I put up, my revenue was 18 rupees a kilowatt hour. Today, the revenue is around 2 rupees 20 to 2 rupees 50. And this in a period of 7 to 8 years. So when you see a dramatic decline in the cost of energy, which is good for the consumer, it's good for the public, but
Has
from
to
a
be good for the producer as well.
spot on. And I think that's the challenge we have. So unless we can figure out ways to get that return balance, we'll struggle to get the kind of capital we need to make that happen. So therefore, as a nation, I think that's something we need to focus on.
Mr. Godrej, would it even be possible for an industry like yours to survive in a revenue downtrend situation that Tejpreet just spoke about? And these are new companies, capital, effort, manpower, Indian brains being put to it, and see what's happened there.
Yep, it would be difficult. But one has to bear in mind that the cost of producing solar energy has also been falling, and it's not clear whether the revenue, I think the revenue has fallen below the cost of production, but the costs have also been steadily falling. And I would like to say that another area of green energy is biomass, which we need to pay more attention to in India, because it's a 24/7 source of energy, and it can complement wind and solar.
I think two things, Siddharth, just to build on the point. One is technology. I think technology is going to play a very, very critical role going forward, not only in renewables, across industries. The use of AI in manufacturing, the use of what I call industrial AI in manufacturing to drive productivity, safety, sustainability is going to become very big. So we need to think about technology. Two is we need to also think about scale. Now, just to put it to Nadir's point out here, my first solar farm, the cost of panels was $6 a watt peak. Till about a year and a half ago, it came down to 19 cents a watt peak, and now it's gone back up again.
Back up to?
It ranges between 20 to 30 cents. And it's become volatile because of lithium, supply chain, COVID. So that's had a big impact on that. Two is cost of capital is going up because of global macro challenges. I think we in India have done a fabulous job to be insulated to a large extent compared to what's happening anywhere else. But let me just finish by one point. If we have to continue to grow our country, it has to be a shared responsibility between the government, private sector, people of India. That's the only way we're going to transform our country, unless we have that shared responsibility.
That's a good a point on transformation. I'm coming to you, Mr. Dhawan, and this is on the broader point. If India is to continue to grow at the present rate and hopefully reach double digits, one of the things that I think confounds me as a journalist is our resource dependency. We saved ourselves when it comes to consumer pump when prices of petrol and diesel by taking a massive strategic call with Russian crude oil. That's not the point I'm asking you. But lithium, so many other items, commodities which can fuel the growth that India so desperately needs. Have we done anything on that, or are we the same as we were 10 years back or 20 years back?
No, I see a lot of activity, but having said that, what we have to be mindful of, that there are certain natural constraints. We don't have lithium in the country. We don't have certain resources that are available, and we have
But
forced
we
to
are said to have
depend.
the largest amount of thorium sands, for example.
Yeah, so it's about it's about developing technologies and moving in that direction. But you can't wait for that technology to develop. That's a parallel exercise. It's like the semiconductors today. There's a massive push for semiconductors because your industry across the board will get impacted.
Can I interrupt you with a quick follow-up on that point? China grew with the West liberally sharing possibly every manner of technology with them till they suddenly woke up and realized that, oh my God, we've been had, if I can use that word on television. Do you think the West, and this is a question I'll pose to you as well, will share the same amount of technology in that China plus one strategy, which has been coined by them, not by us?
My personal view is that the West is going to be very careful with technology. So they will put in sufficient safeguards to make sure what happened doesn't happen again. To what Tejpreet's point is that I think there needs to be a responsibility of everybody, and there's been some amount of irresponsibility with the way technology has been treated around the world. That's also a lesson for us to start funding into research and development. And you cannot do R&D research at a corporate level or a national level unless you go down to the primary level first. I just want you to think about this. Nothing in India's economy today, nothing, is based on primary research that originated in India. So unless you get the research model right, primary research, development research, conversion to goods and services, and eventually get the products, it's a long journey. But we must as a nation make that start.
I just want you to come in before
Yes.
we hand it
Yes, I also agree that India needs to do much more research. The cost of doing research in India is lower. A lot of collaboration needs to be done between research institutes, the government, industry, and universities. Very little research is done in India and universities, which has the double benefit of producing research and educating the next generation. If people are not doing research in universities, you're not getting the right PhD students. So we need to have a big focus on this. The government has a responsibility to coordinate this, incentivize this, and we can be independent of the rest of the world if we do the research. We don't have to be dependent on rare earths or lithium or anything else, because we can make all the products we want without these metals. And that's the research we need to do.
Perhaps some shades of the debate on the hydrogen fuel movement, but Tejpreet, complete that point. That
Yeah. So that one more point on R&D. I completely agree with the points being made that, it is the core of R&D is going to be the core of transforming our country, because that's where the future is. The challenge is core research, and there are certain sectors in our country that have reached that scale to fund research. Let me give you a few examples, right? We are the second largest smartphone maker. We are the largest three-wheeler, two-wheeler auto manufacturer in the world. We are investing $1.4 trillion in infrastructure. So when you think about all this, that is funding the R&D that's required. Chemical industry. We are over $300 billion in the chemical industry, and I think it's been driven by a lot of large chemical companies now doing research in pure R&D for chemicals, molecules that go into the global supply chain for chemicals. So that is happening. But the size of our nation and the scale we require huge amounts of capital, that's our challenge. I'll just say one more thing. Our strength is our people, our brain power, our engineering skills, the human talent. I think 25% of global talent is going to come out of India over the next 10, 20 years. So I'm very optimistic that if we can slowly build up our capital base in R&D, combined with the human capital we have, I think we could be in a very, very good position.
So that just to give you my perspective from a slightly new age industry, one point I agree with and one not so much. I'll provide an alternative view. The point I agree with is that in terms of research, I think a lot of research is happening in India on the services side, on the technology side, on the innovation side, because of AI, ML, only because the other countries don't have the scale. Today, if I have to serve 50 million people at one time on my platform, I have to do research to figure out how I'm going to make that kind of software, write that kind of software. The other countries don't have that issue. So here's where population is becoming a benefit for us, a boon for us, right? So that's the point. I agree that some research in some new age industries is happening, and India is leading the way for that. We also feel, and this is from our perspective as Games 24/7, that, and we talk a lot about science of gaming, where we feel that the true experiences, gaming experiences that you can offer are at the intersection of science and entertainment. And we feel that if you're able to engage your players through using some of these models by understanding how to personalize experiences for them, you can actually create demand.
Right.
This is something that maybe a lot of manufacturing cannot do. They cannot control or create demand. But in the technology space, in the software space, you can actually create demand by engaging people better.
Well, if it's a people question, I can tell you one thing, viewers, as we wind down this conversation. The point about India being everywhere here in Davos is also about India being everywhere when it comes to global corporations. Even the Davos attendee list shows you global companies, even some very few which may not have sizable India operations have Indians inside those companies. So if you remember Intel inside, I think we can safely say Indians inside pretty much everything. But it's going to be a long haul. Patience, perseverance, and passion will be needed. And as our panel told us, 2023 and beyond, like every year, is going to be a year full of opportunities as well as some challenges. I want to thank my entire panel for their time here,
Thank you.
and you, the viewer, for tuning in. We'll see you again. Till then, goodbye.